We will say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Heartfelt and passionate. Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial.
Fearless and truthful.
Hello and welcome to The Pledge. Well, we start with a Pledge exclusive. The Prime Minister in a room full of journalists and ready to take questions. So, Prime Minister, do you think you're going to get a good deal on Brexit?
Do they want that strong and stable leadership in the national interest under the Conservatives or the coalition of chaos headed up by Jeremy Corbyn?
Anyone else got a question?
I have a question, Prime Minister. What do you think about Prince Philip's decision to step down from royal duties?
Do they want that strong and stable leadership in the national interest under the Conservatives or the coalition of chaos headed up by Jeremy Corbyn?
Also on today's show, Nick says fighting for ISIS is a one-way ticket. Afua has a plan to save our democracy. Carol is going to offer a hard truth about the search for Madeleine McCann. And Greg thinks older people have never had it so good. Too good, in fact. Well, it's game on. On the steps of Downing Street, Theresa May accused the EU of fiddling in the general election, of hardening their stance just as Brexit negotiations got underway and not wanting Britain to prosper. Meanwhile, the president of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, says Theresa is on another galaxy and says he left a Downing Street din-dins last week 10 times more sceptical of a happy divorce after the last port than he did before his first aperitif. Both sides then admit that the differences on everything, frankly, do seem profound. No deal seems more likely than a bad deal, even though it's in everyone's interest that a deal is achieved. Which all reminds me, panel, of why I became a paid-up member of the Lib Dems last week. Yes, you may shake your head, Nick, and I do know the Lib Dems won't win, but they're the only party with a clear strategy for tackling the hard Brexit that Theresa and co are heading for. They're offering a second referendum if we do get a deal, thus giving this country one last chance to stop a historic mistake becoming a national tragedy.
Well, when I heard last week that Rachel Johnson has made a surprise decision, I thought you'd left Waitrose and gone to Aldi or something like that. I didn't realise it was this profound. So if Boris Johnson called Mr Corbyn a mugwump, what did he call you when he heard?
As I wrote last Sunday, he thinks I've lost the plot.
Lost your remaining marble.
He lost me, and he's waiting, but I'm afraid he's going to have to wait with bated breath for a few more weeks before I write the column saying, he's right, the Lib Dems are a wobbling jelly of indecision. The funniest comment, though, came from my older son, who came back from a weekend in Brussels, and he said, Mum, what's been going on? Is it true you've entered politics to spend more time with your family? I said, no, darling, I'm not allowed to, because you have to be a member for a year. But listen, Nick, I'm glad you asked this question, because it is a protest vote on one issue for this election that I have done this. Obviously, I know the Lib Dems aren't going to win, but I think it's important that we don't just head over a cliff without looking first.
OK, well, we better say the Lib Dems probably would put it rather differently. They probably characterise it they could win, so we need to get that out there. So this is all on the idea of a second referendum, OK, on the deal. When would that be held?
Well, we don't know when the deal is going to be. We know
You've just deserted a party of your father, your brothers, and God knows what else.
No, I haven't been a member of the Tory party since 2011.
OK, all right. So tell me when the referendum will be held.
Well, when there's a deal on the table.
What,
well,
so after the 2 years?
Yes, well, when... I don't know when the deal... Listen, Nick,
so
when
you don't know when...
No, Nick, sorry, nobody knows when we're going to get a deal. It could be. We don't know if it's going to be by the time that Article 50 clock expires in March 2019. We don't know that.
I'm sorry, but I really object to this. I object to the idea that the Conservatives somehow own Rachel, that because her father and her brothers are Conservative, she somehow owes this duty of loyalty. Politics is about principles. Rachel's standing up for what she believes in. It's an issue of, I think, existential importance for the country. You're asking her questions, it's unfair to ask a voter. She's saying that she's now supporting the Lib Dems. She's a member.
Because she wants a second... If I
as
remember your
many people
introduction...
who voted Remain do.
To avoid a historic mistake, I think, to quote you directly.
Yes.
So why... I'm just asking a how much or a what or a when question. When are we going to hold it?
We don't know. Listen, we don't know whether we're going to have transitional arrangements post-2019. We don't know when the timetable is going to expire, when the deal is going to eventuate. But when that happens, Theresa May has said Parliament can have another look. But I don't think the vote in Parliament is going to be meaningful. I think it's going to be a tick, which is why, of course, she wants a landslide victory in this forthcoming general election, so that she knows that whatever the deal is, she can get it through, which is why the country has to have another look at it.
And so the country says no, so effectively we've played best of three. What happens then?
If the country says no again,
deal,
which I think they probably... I don't know what's going to happen.
So hang on.
All I'm saying is...
So you want a referendum, but you don't know when.
I know...
You want a referendum, you don't know the question, and you don't know what happens as a result. No. Enjoy the Lib Dems.
No.
You are a perfect fit.
Nick, you're being unfair.
You are being completely unfair. You're making this procedural when it's existential.
Yes, the government doesn't know when
Precisely.
when there's going to be a deal.
Precisely.
All you can say is, when there is a deal, if there is one, we ought to have a vote on it again.
But do you
because we then know what the deal was. But I mean, what I'm more interested in is everyone keeps now talking, and after last week it looks more like there's no deal. What does no deal actually mean?
Well, Nick, walk away under WTO rules.
Yes, but so do we...
Carol, do you want to set those out, actually? What they are, what that's going to mean for our GDP?
Or the 100 billion, or whatever they say we owe, do we pay it or not? And what's the legality of that? I don't know.
But I'm interested in this week. Has this week not been a bit of a game changer for you? When you see what's been happening with the EU, with the officials, with the bureaucracy on the EU, how they've tried to discredit this country in the most appalling way, trash and discredit us. They've tried to make our Prime Minister look like she's losing the plot, like she doesn't know what she's doing. Has that not... I think this has changed the game a little bit in the sense it's no longer Leavers and Remainers. It's people who are on the side of this country and people who are siding with the EU. And I think this will change a lot of Remainers and put them not necessarily on the side of the Leavers, but on the side of Britain.
I think you're right. Your Juncker did Theresa May's job for her by saying, you know, he made out that Europe was a bullying bureaucherry trying to tell Britain what to do and not allowing Britain a fair shout. No, that was the brilliant messaging that came out of that dinner. Theresa May's Downing Street must have been absolutely thought it was Christmas.
And what was
because it actually completely moved the argument away. And Theresa May, I'm afraid, has used it as a non sequitur, just as she used having a general election as a non. It's not. You can't say we need a general election in order to strengthen our hand in Europe.
What was odd about that dinner
the two things are different.
When Juncker came out, he said it had all gone very well. He was smiling. He said it was really good. And then the next morning, after a 7 a.m. call to Mrs. Merkel, it was all different then. And one can't help but think that was a bit planned, because from people who were in that dinner, they're saying nothing was discussed that he didn't already know. So it just sounds like it's been a setup to discredit her.
Yeah.
I just don't agree with this. I don't think it's ideal the way that these leaks came out and the various responses to them. But the fact is, the EU have made it quite plain from the beginning that there are various red lines for them that they want to establish before they get into negotiating detail, like the exit bill, like the rights of EU citizens in the UK. The government knew that this was a priority for the EU, and by being completely intransigent and boorish on these issues, they have refused to engage with those issues.
There is nothing in law or in any treaty that says we have to pay £100 billion. Nothing. This is a figure...
The EU haven't said that we have to pay £100 billion. That was a figure that was dreamt up by the Financial Times.
Well, no, I think everybody accepts there's a figure of somewhere
between 60... There is a figure, of course
But there is nothing in law or any legal treaty that says we have to pay anything, and yet they're insisting that we do. Why?
But do we
believe... punish us?
I mean, I'm confused by the whole thing now, because I really don't understand...
I'm confused by life.
Yes, I know.
I'm confused by her, particularly.
Yes. No, I understand her. She makes sense. What I don't understand is... I mean, if you go into a negotiation, what I don't understand... I mean, with the Commissioner saying these are our lines, these are our red lines, you'd say, fine, let's assume we can get a deal on those. Now let's look at our red lines and try... That's what a negotiation is. And I think we're going to have to accept there's going to be some unpleasant things done by both sides in this sort of negotiation. What worries me is in the end you get no deal. And I just want someone to outline exactly what no deal means.
Well, we know what no deal means.
We don't. It's not just World Trade Organization deal.
If we get no deal, I just want to go back to what you say. Why would we have to have another look? And I think it's because when we voted in June last year, what the country thought they were getting if they voted leave was a richer country with hard borders. And if we get no deal, I think we would have voted for a poorer country with no necessary controls on immigration. So it's an exact opposite of actually what people thought, which is in which case I think people should be given buyer's remorse.
That is why I think you're wrong, that I think all Remain voters are going to be looking at this and now feeling that to be patriotic is to side with Theresa May in this, because she's created this into a zero-sum game. No, the no-deal paradigm is completely unhelpful. We need a deal. We don't have all the bargaining chips in this negotiation.
You'll forget, we want to do a deal. They're making it impossible.
A very strange way.
We want to do the deal.
Let's give it a chance. Let's give it a chance.
I wonder if I could just keep it nice and personal and come back to you. That's what I'm here to do. You are, whether you're a Liberal Democrat, I don't know, you are definitely socially liberal, because I know you. So how do you square that with the views of your party leader when it comes to homosexuality? Take a look at this.
Now, we all know that you don't think being gay is a sin, but do you think that having gay sex or being engaged in gay sex is sinful?
One's personal faith is one's personal faith. What counts is your actions and your beliefs in politics. And my track record and my passion as a Liberal Democrat over the last 30 years, since I was a young Liberal campaigning against Section 28 back in the late 1980s, to just the other year when, as part of the Liberal Democrat team in government, we brought in equal marriage and supporting people's right to love who they love, to be who they are, to marry who they marry, that speaks for itself.
He has subsequently said, quotes, "I do not believe gay sex is a sin," but by goodness, it took him a while to get there. You're happy with that sort of leadership?
I think you're confusing his personal beliefs with his party policies. I'm sure you, as a solid Tory, don't necessarily espouse all
I'm not
Tory...
the leader of the party yet.
I think you have to allow him to have personal beliefs. And also, Nick, you're looking at me as if I've taken on and I've espoused 100 years of Liberal Party policy since Gladstone or whatever. You know, I haven't. I'm doing this for this election on this policy and on one issue, and I'm glad you've given me another opportunity to make that clear.
Okay, I've now sat next to you for about a year here, on and off, you know, listening, and actually I think you fit the Liberals pretty well.
Thank you.
I do.
That's what Tim Farron said last week. He said it was a great addition to the team, which was a bit worrying. I didn't know I was on the team.
Are you going to campaign with Tony Blair? Because he's going to be campaigning with you guys. Are you going to come?
Is he campaigning with the Lib Dems?
He says so.
I think
he says he wants to.
I think he said he wouldn't.
He said he won't. No, he just said he wanted to 2 days ago.
The Lib Dems need all the help we can get, frankly.
OK, well, let's move on from that bombshell. OK. It was 10 years ago that 3-year-old Madeleine McCann disappeared from her parents' holiday apartment in Portugal. Since then, an incredible £12 million of taxpayers' money and thousands of police man-hours have been spent in the hunt to find this little lost girl. A decade on, we still know nothing of her fate. We have no more idea of what happened to Madeleine now than we did then. It's like time has stood still. So as harsh as it sounds, is it time to say enough is enough? Every possible thing has been done to find Madeleine, but it isn't fair to keep throwing money at this search when the parents of hundreds of other missing children remain devastated. Not just at the loss of their child, but at the fact that to them, it seems the loss of their precious babies just isn't worth the time, the resources or the manpower as the loss of Madeleine McCann. Trouble is, Madeleine's disappearance has become a political issue. No PM, no government minister wants to be the one to pull the plug. Well, as sad as it is, and for the sake of all those other little mites who've just gone missing, we have to.
I mean, Carol, I think you're right in many ways, because I think the search for Madeleine McCann has become a national story. It's gone on and on and on, and I think it's because many of us can identify, you know, they went off, 2 white doctors from Leicestershire, went to Praia da Luz in Portugal for a, tapas and beach holiday with their kids, and terrible thing happened. And we all identify it. It's incredibly relatable, and probably a disproportionate amount of money has been spent on this one child. But it's not a completely cold case, and I think that some of the documentaries that came out this week to mark the 10-year anniversary showed that you can understand why the parents don't want to give up hope, because not even the police have given up hope. There's a clip. Can we just watch the clip from the Sky documentary from a copper who says that there is a lead?
The Portuguese and Metropolitan Police both admit their relationship has sometimes been fraught, but they now say they're working closely together.
I know we have a significant line of inquiry which is worth pursuing, and because it's worth pursuing, it could provide an answer, but until we've gone through it, I won't know whether we're going to get there or not.
What area is that focusing on?
We've got a significant line of inquiry. We can fish around this as much as you want. Ourselves and the Portuguese are doing a critical piece of work, and we don't want to spoil it by putting tidbits of information out publicly.
I completely get the fact that Madeleine's parents never want to give up the search for their little girl. I get the fact that any parent of any missing child never wants to give up the search because you can't see your own child's life in terms of cost effectiveness. It's impossible. However, the fact of the matter is that this amount of money has to be spent. He says there's a lead. Let's listen to what former Detective Chief Inspector Colin Sutton said. He wasn't part of the Madeleine inquiry, but he was part of the film that Sky put out the other night, Searching for Madeleine.
There's no firm evidence to explain what happened. There's no happy ending, no tragic ending. There's no ending at all. If you were in charge today, what would you be doing? What more could you be doing?
Here and now, where we are now, I would be saying we need to start this again from the beginning and look at absolutely everything. Because unless that's done, I fear the Scotland Yard investigation will just peter out and we may never know.
So are you saying that the past 6 years, £12 million has all been a waste?
I suppose I am.
It's a pretty unstable thing to say, but 10 years down the line, do we seriously think she's going to be found now?
My concern is this. The first police officer from who you heard, Assistant Commissioner Mark Rowley, who is the national lead on counter-terrorism. Yes. So why is he involved in the Madeleine McCann case? We still have officers today working on this case. What do they do? Are we not allowed, with the level of expenditure, 11 or 12 million pounds, and of course I don't expect the person's name, but are we not allowed just the faintest scintilla of what it is the police is looking at? I think you're right in your introduction, and actually you're both right. Good Lord, if it was one of my children or grandchildren, there's not enough money on earth. I would mortgage the house, I don't care. But with the cuts that we know there are, unless there is a tangible lead, and given the fact that I think the average cost we have in our briefing notes that normally they expend somewhere in the region of about £1,500, £2,000. This is an extraordinary amount of money. I do think it is a political situation. I think we have a right to know the magnitude of this lead, and then that should force a decision.
But it's not even saying it's not worth it. It's just, what is it they're looking for? Nick's right. We have a right to know what they're looking for, especially at a time. You know, just 2 years ago, the Police Federation wanted to go on halt because of the spike in murders in London, because of the spike in terrorism. They wanted to be able to spend the money on that. So, you know, I get that. But 10 years on, a really strong lead. If it's that strong, why weren't they looking at it 2 years ago?
But if it's
and how has it come up?
If the police are telling us they've got a really strong lead, they're not going to tell us. The politicians should say to the police, it's your decision. It's not going to be... But, you know, reality, that's quite difficult. But I agree with you. In the end, that's what they should say. The politicians should say to the police, look, if this is not worth spending, let's not spend it.
I feel like we're conflating a few different things here. Because you said in your intro, Carol, that it's unfair to the parents of other missing children. But are you saying that the money that's being spent on the Madeleine McCann investigation should be spent on investigating other missing children? Or are you saying it should just go into the police pot generally?
Well, I think there's about £100 million is spent on missing children every year.
Because if there's not enough money spent...
It's an inordinate amount spent on one child.
But if there's not enough spent... Because I completely agree that it's not fair to focus all this resource on Madeleine McCann, absolutely tragic though her story is, when there are so many other missing children. But at the same time, I think if we're not spending enough money and police time on missing children, that's a separate thing that we should be talking about. And it's not a question then of kind of Madeleine McCann and other children being mutually exclusive. We should prioritise missing children, if that's what you're saying. I think I might agree. And also, just to add to that, you know, it is true that it's shocking how often children go missing in this country. But at the same time, the number of very young children, like Madeleine McCann, aged around 3, that go missing is infinitesimally small. It's very, very rare. And so I think that's one reason why this case has really gripped me. But it's just such a mystery. She was so young. There are so many unanswered questions. So I can understand why people are still interested in it. And then there's the separate issue of how the investigation was conducted, which, you know, I mean, I thought Martin Brunt's documentary, The Sky one we just saw clips from, really kind of revealed to me in a way I hadn't appreciated how completely flawed the investigation was. And
botched,
the fact that no DNA was taken and they
And
rented out the apartment to other families.
2 families before they actually sealed it off.
There's no substitute for those initial hours and days of investigating. But if we're saying that there's no chance after 10 years of getting a new lead and it should be shut down for that reason, that's a separate thing. But I think it's important to be clear about the reason why we think it shouldn't be investigated. Is it because it's hopeless now? Some children do get found 10 years later.
But you know what? But the interesting fact is the stats show that the ones that do get found after a long period of time, it's by happenstance. It's not actually by police work.
They just turn up.
There was one in South Africa where a girl was enrolled in a school and people were staggered by how similar she was to this other girl in the class. And it turned out that this was the baby that had been stolen from the mother in the hospital when she was born. So that's how kids missing for a long time are eventually found.
It would be so good if she...
It would be fantastic.
Anyway, it's time to
let's all hope she does.
And let's hope so.
Absolutely.
Whether the police carry on or not.
Yeah.
It's time to move on now. And we like to think, I think we can all agree, that we live in a democracy. And we certainly have no shortage of elections at the moment. But for the last 20 years, only 2/3 of eligible voters have actually taken part on polling day. Young voter participation in Britain is among the lowest in the EU. This isn't a new problem, but it is taking on new dimensions. Britain is leaving the EU thanks to the powerful lobby of older white voters who vote in numbers. Polling indicates that 73% of 18 to 24-year-olds, 73% of black Brits were pro-Remain. But these voters have failed to have a proportionate influence on the outcome because they're the same groups who don't vote. I'm almost always in favour of influencing people to change behaviour through incentives, not coercion. But desperate times call for desperate measures. There are many complex reasons why large numbers of people in our society don't vote. But we can't change those problems until they do. It's time to make voting compulsory.
Afua, can we just work our way through some of those statistics and see if I've got them right? 73% of 18 to 24-year-olds voted to remain. 73% of black voters voted to remain. This is from an exit poll done on the day of the referendum by the Conservative Lord Ashcroft. So,
and just to add to that, because there is no official data on the demographics.
But that's as a proportion of people who turned up to vote, obviously. So in that age group, what do you suppose the percentage was that did turn up to vote?
Of the
18 to 24.
No, it was,
there is no official record.
In the referendum, the indications are it was higher than usual.
Yeah, OK, that's
so
very smart.
Why don't you...
60 which?
69,
64.
I think?
64 seems to be, right.
Yeah.
So, effectively, a third couldn't be bothered.
Yeah.
Couldn't be bothered. So
well, that's one way of characterising it, but they didn't vote.
Well,
you can't say that you know why they didn't vote.
Why didn't they go then?
Well, I don't know either.
This great thing that if you listen to Nick Clegg and Tim Farron, her best buds now, her new best buds, that'll be a fun dinner party. I don't want to miss that one. This is going to influence the rest of their lives. They couldn't give a damn.
Well, I have some insight as to why I
want to hear that insight.
Vote.
But lastly, if you're actually saying to them that even if a plague on all your houses, I don't like the Tory, I don't like the Labour, I don't like UKIP, I don't like Lib Dem, I don't like... You're going to force them to vote for somebody.
Yes. No, well, you can spoil your ballot. You
you can act like somebody who is emotionally or educationally challenged and put your line through it.
There are reasons why people spoil their ballot.
I think that's so wrong. Can I tell you why? Because I think it serves politicians right to know that in some instances they will get less votes than a jazz trombone-playing tap dancer on Britain's Got Talent. They need to know how, in some instances, how unpopular they are, how their policies don't count, how they are failing to register with young people, because if they don't know that, how else are they going to address it?
Why are you assuming that if everybody voted, all politicians would necessarily get more votes?
Because you're being forced, you're being corralled into doing so. What are you going to do, fine them if they
don't? There's no evidence, first of all. This isn't about outcomes. There's no evidence that compulsory voting actually preferences one party or one political ideology.
So an 18-year-old doesn't vote. What happens to him or her?
He doesn't vote. So
no. But what's the punishment?
Oh, you mean in my previous? Well, you can look at other countries that do it. And actually, I have some stats here. So there are, I think, about 20 countries, maybe more, that have compulsory voting. Not all of them enforce it. Australia has compulsory voting, and turnout in the last general election in Australia was 95%.
Right.
And the punishment for not voting was a $20 fine. That's around £11 in UK money. And there's also Brazil.
So
they have compulsory voting, an average of 80% turnout, again, much higher than the UK, and a more draconian punishment in Brazil that you get banned from getting loans or having a passport. I'm not saying I advocate that.
So, just lastly, because I must yield the floor, you're telling me the way to get 18-year-olds engaged in politics is to fine them if they don't vote?
I'm not necessarily saying a fine, Nick.
Well, what then?
Well, you can have other sanctions, like, for example,
they don't get a library book.
You get, you know, a discount on your national insurance.
You think an 18-year-old gives a flying fig?
You know
about
what, Nick? You asked me why they don't vote, right? And I'll open up in a second.
Of course.
A lot of young people I speak to, and I do countless events with young people about voting and participating generally. A lot of them say, "I don't see the point. You know, I voted once; it didn't make any difference. We still had tuition fees introduced. We still had our educational maintenance allowance. You know, we've got no hope of ever owning a home. We're going to be working till we're 70." They have reasons, and they say, "I don't feel like my vote makes a difference." That is the perfect vicious circle, because then they don't think there's any point taking part. They don't vote. Politicians don't make policies with them in mind because there are no consequences at the ballot box, and then they feel more disillusioned, and then they don't vote. And that's why we need to break the cycle, and that's why I'm suggesting something constructive.
Well, I mean, it's been compulsory voting is 100 years in Australia. Do you really think you could introduce it here and it would have an impact?
Yes.
You see, I don't see how you can force people to do it now. It's not
Greg,
part of the culture.
Remember what happened when we tried to fine parents for taking their kids on holiday? That guy snarled us, you know, took his kids to Disney World. We are very resistant as a country to being told what to do. I completely understand where AFA's coming from, because as things stand, we see the evidence. The older you are, the more higher percentage of people who vote. The younger you are, and BME. The lower the percentage. So, in fact, what we have is a system which enforces a gerontocracy. You know, it's a government by the old, for the old.
Do you know, I'm quite surprised at you, because you're a big champion of civil liberties, and compulsory voting is a violation of civil liberties. It actually infringes people's right to be apolitical.
I never thought I'd hear you sitting here as the human rights
I'm saying
champion,
it.
Carol.
It infringes. Now listen,
she's joining Liberty next week.
From where I'm sitting, not voting is shameful. You know, not to be too dramatic about it. People died for it, and actually, I would rather people not vote. Those people who can't be bothered to go to the polling station, those people who can't be bothered listen, let me finish. Those people who can't be bothered to ascertain the information that will help them make an informed decision on who runs their country. I'd rather those people didn't vote. Really, I would. But I think, shouldn't people in a free country, which is what you're always banging on about, don't they have a fundamental right to be left alone, to live their life within the law, but not?
You're describing this as a society where everyone can just do what they like. We don't have any choice about paying tax. You don't have any choice about sending your children to school. You have no choice about jury duty. There are many obligations. With rights come responsibilities. No, well, you have to educate them at home. You have you can't choose whether to educate your children.
It's true.
There are other things that we regard as such important civic responsibilities that they're mandatory. I think that the only reason voting isn't one of them is because it served the interests of the political class to exclude young people. You're characterising this as they can't be bothered. They're lying in. They can't be asked to get out of bed.
That's why
that is a very crude caricature.
Want to give the 16-year-olds vote, Carol, because they might vote for the Labour Party.
But why didn't
that
they
was
vote?
out.
If they cared so much about staying in Europe, why didn't they get out there and vote? Every time I saw someone young interviewed, they said, we're going to stay in Europe. And then you found out they couldn't be bothered. It's what Nick says. If you can't be bothered, and if you don't have the information in your head to make an informed decision, don't vote.
But they also changed the system on registration. So overnight, students found themselves not registered to vote unless they went individually. Now, why did they do that?
Oh, I can't imagine.
Why did they do that?
Lefties.
Because students happen to not support them.
Colleagues, talking of compulsory voting, it's my turn next, and I want you all to agree with every word I say. The good news is a jihadist and his young bride have come to their senses and turned their backs on the murderous medieval death cult. The bad news is they want to come back from Syria to the UK. Well, presumably they've tired of days at the beach being spoiled by mass beheadings or the continual cries of rape victims as their former ISIS pals instill discipline in rebellious areas. Sadly, though, for Stefan Aristidou and his wife Kolsoma Begum, their bid to return to the UK was thwarted by Turkish authorities, who have detained them. Now, no one has an accurate figure as to how many former ISIS fanatics want to come home, but we're definitely talking in the hundreds. Our response has to be, in this case, A resolute no. Turkish police want to jail Stefan for 15 years. I say, let them.
So the thing about this, Nick, is that I think we want the same thing. I think everybody here wants the same thing. We would all like to see the end of ISIS. We're all absolutely horrified and appalled by them. Disturbed by the fact that British people are going to join them in any way. And we want to make sure that the UK is safe and that people who've been radicalised and are dangerous are not coming back here to radicalise others and plan attacks, right? So we want the same things. Where I differ with you is that I think what you're advocating will actually go against those ends. So I think it's more dangerous to send a message to people who've gone to fight that they can't come back, that they have nothing to lose, that we leave them at large wherever they are, committing potentially even more atrocities. I believe that if they come back and are processed by the criminal justice system, monitored by the intelligence agencies, which, by the way, have sweeping new powers, not all of which I personally agree with, but you can't deny the fact that they have more powers than ever to monitor, keep them under surveillance, put restrictions on their movement, force them to undergo de-radicalisation. That was the point of our counter-terrorism laws. So if you have any confidence in our criminal justice system, in our security services and our police, then you have to accept that as British citizens they should come back and be dealt with properly.
I have tremendous faith and confidence, and I give thanks on a daily basis for the men and women who are out there on the front line. I don't think we realise until cases come to court just how fantastically fortunate we are to have them. But as we said in Carol's debate earlier, we know that the police are under incredible pressures. The idea that we would have round-the-clock monitoring... I was once told by a senior police officer, I think it takes something like 30 police officers to monitor one person one day without them ever knowing, because you have to have guys standing by with motorbikes in case they suddenly take... We simply haven't got it. I'm sorry, this isn't like a bad decision. This isn't like he went on the wrong holiday with some mates and got a little bit drunk. He signed up to, as I said earlier, a murderous death cult. With that decision comes responsibilities. You ain't coming back.
I was just going to say, I have sympathy with girls of 14, 15 going off to join ISIS because they're young and they've been groomed online, all the rest of it. But I have no sympathy with... They were 20 at the time, she was 20, he was 21 at the time. At that point, they would have seen the beheadings on British television. They would have seen men being burned in cages. They can't pretend they didn't know what ISIS was about or what it was doing. So when you make a decision like that, when you live in a country like this country, which is the most amazing country to live in, when you go somewhere that wants to destroy this country and kill people when you want to come back, no, you can't. Take responsibility for what you do. And I think you were talking about messages being sent out. If you want to send a message to people in this country who are thinking of going to Syria to train, the message is you go, you don't come back. I think that's a much more powerful message than having people back. Because although this guy says they want to come back and the only reason they wanted to go live there was because of Sharia law, he could have done that here. And who's to say he's not radicalised even now? He's saying he's not. He's saying he wants to live in peace, the guy.
Yeah.
Who's saying he's not radicalised?
I'm suggesting as a free pass.
Doesn't this couple claim in their defence that they didn't want to join ISIS, they wanted only to live under Sharia law?
Yeah,
and for the moment, this country, when I last looked, isn't under Sharia law, although Carol often makes us all terrified. It's on its way, coming down the pike. So I think, the rule of law should apply to all British citizens, whether they have been guilty or found guilty of terrorist offences or not. Why don't we just bring them back, let them serve their time, de-radicalise them in prison, drain them of all the intelligence, and then get them to go out and de-radicalise other potential recruits to the ISIS cause? Why? Cheaper too.
I'll tell you in a minute.
What I don't understand is what happens to them if you don't... I mean, where would you leave
15
them?
years in a Turkish jail.
That's if they... But there'll be others who will come back who won't be charged by the Turks, right? Yeah. What happens to them? They're born here, most of them.
Yes.
They're British citizens. Do they not have a right to come back anyway?
No, not if we can prove that they're members of ISIS.
So where do they go?
Let them stay in Syria. Stay in Syria, like I care. Let's actually because the man isn't here to defend himself, but let's hear him talking with Sky News' Stuart Ramsey earlier.
And if they failed that camp, what would happen to them then?
There's no failing, there's no escaping. You're just... You can't fail it. It's not a test. It's just like a prison. At the end of the day, I'm just trying to get my life back. If it so be it that I have to go to prison in order to do that, and I'm prepared to do that. Like I said, I'm not here to harm anybody. I'm just here to look after my family and live my life.
I'm not saying that man because he's not here to defend himself, but ISIS terrorists would slit your throats, and those are the ones you love as soon as look at you. That is the reality. I don't want them in this country, Rachel.
I think the more publicity this story is given across the world, the better. Because what that man's saying, he referred to something called the camp, which is the camp of repentance, which is not where I'm going for having joined the Lib Dems. No, it is. The camp of repentance. For 2 weeks, Boris says, 2 weeks, and then I want you to retract. No, but it just goes to show that, you know, if you join ISIS, you are signing your own death warrant, basically, aren't you? So the more people are aware of this, the better. So bring them back into the country and spread the word.
You say de-radicalise. It's not like turning a switch. You say bring them back.
Radicalisation is like turning a switch.
No, but to de-radicalise, it's not like, oh, right, we'll turn him off, he's OK again.
But we don't know even what this guy has done, because he has been detained and been arrested on terrorist offences. So he may have killed people already. And if he has, why would we want him back here?
The problem I have with this, you know, it's not ideal. Nobody's happy about the fact that British people are going and doing this. But the point is, if they're British, it's not optional that they're British or not.
But the British went away to train to kill British people.
You're also presenting it as it's kind of either you leave them where they are or you give them a clean pass and they get to come home and have a lovely time. And let's just listen to what the woman's father had to say about what he thought the treatment should be for his own daughter. He said, I would give them a lesson so that they can realise their mistakes. They have to face the law. The law will decide what punishment to give them. But as a father, I'm saying everybody deserves a second chance. Now, whether you agree with that or not, this country
what
is
he also said was maybe they've learned their lesson. Well, maybe it isn't good enough. Maybe to get them back here, they've learned their lesson isn't good enough.
That's where our criminal justice system comes in, Carol. You know, this is a country characterised by the rule of law. We have rules, we have a system. And this is exactly what groups like ISIS want to destroy. And when you pander to this kind of reactionary feeling that you could just kind of leave them in Turkey and throw away
the key,
you're actually furthering that agenda.
They're the reactionaries, Afua, not us. They went to train to kill us.
And we're nothing like that.
Isn't the real problem is that none of us understand why they would have gone in the first place? Right. It's so alien to what we are. And therefore, I couldn't sit here and say they should not come back under any circumstances because I just don't understand. I don't understand them enough. But the one thing you do know is people who have been radicalised and have changed and can go back and talk to other people are incredibly valuable. Who can go and talk to other kids, go and talk to schools. But the trouble is, it's too difficult because as I've watched them go, I've thought, I don't understand this at all. Surely your point, Carol, surely they've seen what's on the news. They've seen what's happening.
I don't really agree with you, Greg. I mean, I obviously can't relate to going and wanting to be part of ISIS, but I don't, you know, I've spoken to quite a few of these people and met them, and they're not aliens. You know, they're human beings. They're often young. They've been groomed, a lot like people get groomed for sexual abuse or paedophilia or other things that are very difficult to understand.
They're too old to be
Please,
okay.
I'm not saying they're victims. I'm not defending them. I'm saying they are human beings. It's possible to create a kind of explanation, not a defence, not an excuse, but it is possible to understand how this has happened, and it's also, therefore, possible to counter it.
OK. Well, it's me next panel, and I'm sorry to tell you all, but old age will come to all of us. Some would argue it's come to me already. But I'll argue that some pensioners have had it too good for too long. Mrs May needs to put fairness before electoral politics and say quite clearly in the Tory party manifesto that pensioners cannot expect such a rosy future under the next Tory government. Of course, everyone agrees we should look after the poorest pensioners, but the evidence shows that millions of elderly people who are protected by the triple lock pension don't need it. The people who do need more money in our society are the hard-pressed young families who, through their tax bills, are having to pay for these benefits for the elderly. The Tories are the only major party who haven't committed to keeping the triple lock. So now's their chance to face economic reality and accept that there are an awful lot of older people in our society who can live perfectly well without many of the benefits they are currently getting. The problem, of course, is that the elderly turn out en masse in elections, and scrapping the triple lock will not be a vote winner, but it will be the fair thing to do.
high. Right, now, you just said pensioners are their rosy future and they're living very well. You know, let's look at what they're actually living on. The maximum they get on this triple log pension is 155 quid a week. The basic is 119 quid a week. Now, let me ask you all a question around this table. When you go out for dinner, what would you pay for a dinner for two when you go out in London, roughly?
Well, the burger bar that I go to...
No, you would never go to a burger bar. You probably go to a restaurant.
120 quid.
Exactly, and that's the figure I was thinking of. So we're expecting people to live for a whole week on what we would pay for a meal out. You know, there are a lot of pensions...
But we're not the typical...
But I know,
I never spend 120 quid on dinner.
There are 1.1 million single pensioners. That's widows living alone.
Oh, sure.
And they live on nothing but what the state gives them. This is a pathetic amount of money, Greg, in this day and age. You know, just look at what they get a year. It's 8,000 a year on maximum, and it's 6,100 a year on the minimum. So how can anyone be expected to live? You make it sound like they're living this life of luxury.
That's why I said at the beginning quite clearly. Well, let's understand what the triple lock is, and I'll read it out because we all saw what happens this week when you don't read something out. The triple lock guarantees that state pensions in the UK will increase by whichever is the highest, really. The rate of inflation, the increase in average earnings, or 2.5%. So those years where there was no inflation, which we've had, they were getting 2.5%.
But they were starting from the low base.
My argument, yes, and that low base has changed. My argument is not that your single pensioner who's got no other money shouldn't be helped. I think they probably should be helped more. My argument is there's an awful lot of people who aren't like that. And when all of us reach pensionable age, which I have, but when all of you reach pensionable age, you'll still be having your £120 dinner, won't you?
No, probably not, actually, because I don't know as much as most of you around this table.
But all I'm saying is the days of universal benefits, when everybody gets it, regardless of how much money they've got, how much they've earned, I think have to come to an end.
Okay, so now you raise an interesting question. Actually, I've been slightly persuaded by Carol, because I think 155 quid a week is quite little. And actually, keeping the triple lock has cost the Exchequer £3 billion more than they thought since 2010. I think by 2014-15 it had cost 2.9 billion more. So in a sense, why aren't you saying the wealthy should be means tested and sacrifice their fuel, their free bus pass, or do they even get their licence fee free? I don't know.
Yes.
But you know, why
Everybody
can't?
I
mean, how much would that save?
It's
rather
not worth
than
they've run the figures.
abandoning the triple lock.
Well, actually, the Pensions Committee in the House of Commons actually came out with a recommendation to end the triple lock. Because they said,
by 2020,
and I'll read what Frank Field, who was the chairman, said, is with the triple lock in place, the only way state expenditure can be sustainable is to keep raising the state pension age, which actually hits people from lower income families.
Is that why Prince Philip has only just retired?
I mean, I don't think he's sitting worried about his old age pension.
A civilised society is judged on the way it treats its elderly, its infirm, its frail. We can't now. You know, when I think it was 6 years ago, 2006, the triple lock was brought in. Before that, pensioners were living below the poverty line. All this did was bring them into line with everyone else.
Some into line, and some didn't need it. And that's the argument I'm making. Not everybody needs it, and actually, increasingly, people don't need it. I mean, there's an interesting figure that says since the triple lock came in, the average house in this country has gone up in value by £60,000 since 2011.
In London, maybe?
So, no. The average house has gone up by £60,000. Now, it will be more in London and less in other places, but it's gone up by £60,000. Now, somehow, do you continue to say to younger people who can't afford to buy a house, do you continue to say to them, look, you've got to pay more to keep older people who are actually, a lot of whom are quite well off?
I've just got to correct myself. I said this was introduced, the triple lock, in 2006. It was actually 2010 by the coalition government.
The reality is, I think you're both onto something, and look, you've done, and I've often said this to you before, fantastic, you've made a few quid, good luck. There's no reason on earth you should be getting we shouldn't be paying for your TV licence as and when you reach that age. You shouldn't be giving anything. And you're right to means test. The money involved is absurd. This rosy future that you talk of for the elderly in this country, well, it wasn't rosy for 32,000 last winter who couldn't afford to turn up the gas, so they subsequently perished. But where Afua, and I heard her mumbling quite rightly, is we should be doing more to help the young. I argue it's not mutually exclusive. I would urge everyone to look at something such as the foreign aid budget, which would solve this at a... It's very well you don't work.
We're happy to do this for people abroad, but not our own people.
No, but the other thing we've been discussing as a nation over the last few weeks is obviously care, and clearly care for the elderly is going to get more and more and more expensive on the public purse. And the way to solve that is to say to the better off pensioners, you don't need this much.
No, but there are other redistributive ways. And, you know, I don't think in 10 years that older people are going to be able to get the value out of their homes. They're going to have to use it to pay for social care. It's clear. There's no other way that social care is going to be able to be funded at the rate it needs. So I don't think that you have to look at the triple lock as the only way of balancing things out. And, you know, I kind of agree with Carol, because in a way I don't trust us to abolish the triple lock, because we've been so cavalier with the way we've treated the elderly. I mean, until the turn of the century, a quarter of pensioners were living in poverty, and now it's still 1 in 7.
A report that came out recently said that in the last 20 years, the amount of people relying solely on the state has rocketed. It's rocketed by, I think it's 29%. Sorry, 29% in the past 5 years, but in the past 20, it's steadily gone up. And that's people relying solely on what they get from the state.
Oh, and let's take someone like a nurse. In the last 5 years, nurses have had an increase in their wages by 1% a year. Year after year. And that's what and most state employees have had 1% a year. At the same time as pensioners have been getting 2.5%, 3% because of the triple lock. Now, there comes a moment, and actually, to be fair, the Pensions Committee said quite clearly, yeah, this has readjusted the balance and made it much better. But there comes a moment when, as a society, you can't spend the money that way because you need to spend it on others.
But they've paid in for decades.
Yes, exactly.
These
These are the people who paid.
Exactly. And this is appalling. Of course, the nurse should be getting, he or she should be getting most of it. But some of these folk that we're talking about haven't been paying in for 10, 20. They've been paying in for 40 or 50. And if the most we're getting is, what was it, £155?
155 is the most. Basic is 190.
You know, Carol is actually right. We should be judged by how we look after our elderly and our sick and elderly, including young people.
But what about the people who don't need that money?
Yeah, I agree, but it's the cost of the means testing, isn't it?
Well, yeah, you're balancing the cost of means testing, but we do that because all these people we do it in tax. Yeah. All these people are doing tax. Why don't we just say, well, if you're on a higher rate of tax, we'll tax all that lot. Well, you can't get this. I mean, it's not...
the other issue is the fact that wages have not been rising, and that has been affecting people across the board of all ages, you know. And I mean, it's interesting to hear you, Nick, kind of saying how outrageous it is that nurses have had only a 1% increase. No, that's what the Conservative government and austerity, and that's what's been completely missing.
They would say they poured in more money into the health service than any other government.
I'm talking about what should be in the Tory manifesto. You've all heard what I would put into a manifesto. What would you put into a manifesto?
It's what we've been talking about. I'd put in social care. I would make provision for social care to make it right, because thousands of elderly people are dying. I don't know, because I'm not there and I don't have the figures at hand, but I would make money to fund social care.
It's the F word. Scrap foreign aid. I know you're going to raise your eyebrow, but there we are.
We did that last week, Nick, and you didn't win then.
In your view.
I would want some serious measures to tackle child poverty and to reverse the school funding criteria, which I think are a disaster.
Right. And as our resident Liberal, what would you put in the Conservative Party?
I want the Tories to keep all the environmental protections that we've gained through 40 years of being member of the EU intact, so that we don't destroy the environment as we go over the cliff.
Is there a suggestion they're not going to?
Yes, totally. I think there's going to be a bonfire of the environmental regulations. It's going to be one of the first things.
OK, well, it's time now for the Pledges Straight Talker of the Week. As we've seen, it's been a week of controlled messaging and slogans about slogans. But one man's straight talking and a good head for numbers cut right through all the political spin. And it pains me to say this, but our straight talker of the week is none other than our very own Nick Ferrari. And here's why.
How much would 10,000 police officers cost?
Well, over a 4-year period, we believe it'll be about £300,000.
£300,000?
Sorry,
10,000 police officers? What are you paying them?
No, I mean, sorry.
How much will they cost?
It will cost about £80 million.
But if you, I don't understand. If you divide 80 million by 10,000, you get 8,000. Is that what you're going to pay these policemen and women?
No, we're talking about a process over 4 years.
I don't understand. What is he or she getting? 80 million divided by 10,000 equals 8,000. So, what are these police officers going to be paid?
We will be paying them the average...
Has this been thought through?
Of course it's been thought through.
Where are the figures?
The figures are that the additional cost in year one, when we anticipate recruiting about 250,000 policemen, will be 64.3 million.
250,000 policemen?
And women.
So you're getting more than 10,000. You're recruiting 250,000.
No, we are recruiting 2,000 and perhaps 250.
Where did 250,000 come from?
I think you said that, not me.
No, I can assure you said that because I wrote it down.
So for that epic interview, Nick, congratulations. You are this week's Straight Talker. And can I just say, I thought it was an incredibly restrained, professional interview. Really good.
Yeah. Well, that's very sweet.
But I want to ask you a question.
Oh, no, it's not a maths question.
No, I'm asking about maths.
Well, good at it.
I want to know, why does... She obviously had the numbers with her.
Yeah.
So what was happening?
I don't know, you could hear papers being rustled, couldn't you? I just don't think she'd fully mastered the brief. But to have the award...
I think we know.
Yeah, to have the award from you, of all people, anybody was going to... The fact that you had to be dragged out of your, what is it, cold, dead hand or something to give me that award.
Well, no, I have to say, I suggested it because I listened to it on the BBC, by the way, because it made the top of their bulletins, which your bosses at LBC must be very pleased with.
Actually, I was going to say, I actually texted them to say, as a journalist, I was so jealous of that interview. I was so jealous of having her on the hook for all of that time.
Can I just put in a word in defence of Diane,
Oh,
please? I know, who can deny that it was a car crash?
Yes.
Your award is richly deserved. But she is not the first politician to make a hash of an interview or forget the numbers. I don't know why, but let's not forget. This happens.
She didn't forget the numbers. She had no
will
clue
not
what the
be the
numbers
last.
were.
Of course it's thought through, by the way, is my watchword now. Of course it's thought through.
Of course it's thought through. We just don't know the numbers. Anyway, well, that's it from us. More strong and stable debate next week. Goodbye.